If you know so much, then answer this. The engineer mocked the janitor until she did this. Sarah Johnson wrung out the cleaning cloth harder than necessary as she listened to the laughter coming from the meeting room. The chief engineer, Richard Thompson, was once again humiliating someone in front of the entire technical team at the Industrial Equipment Factory in Detroit. People like you will never understand the complexity of what we do here, Richard said disdainfully, pointing to the blueprints spread across the table. It takes years of study to grasp these machines. Sarah stopped cleaning and peered through the slightly open door. Richard was showing technical drawings to a group of workers who had questioned some procedures. The man in the dark suit gestured arrogantly, as if explaining impossible concepts to children. This project here cost the company $2 million. Every bolt, every weld was mathematically calculated. It's not something just anyone can understand, Richard continued, slamming his fist on the table. That was when Sarah saw the mistake. A glaring error in the strength calculations that made her heart race. The material specifications were completely wrong. If that equipment was built that way, the structure wouldn't withstand even half the intended pressure. She hesitated for a moment. For 3 years she had worked at that factory. Always silent, always efficient, cleaning every corner without anyone noticing her presence. But this time was different. This time, lives could be at risk. "Excuse me," Sarah said, stepping into the room in her still damp yellow uniform. Richard stopped mid-explanation and turned to her with deep irritation. "What do you want here?" "This is a technical meeting, not a place for cleaning staff." "I know, Sir Richard, but I need to talk about this project," Sarah replied, pointing to the blueprints on the table. Laughter erupted in the room. Richard shook his head mockingly and crossed his arms. "Oh, so now the janitor understands engineering. That's the end of the world," he said, provoking more laughter from some of those present. Sarah's face burned with shame, but she didn't back down. She was absolutely certain of what she had seen. "Sir, the material strength calculations are wrong. If you build this equipment with the current specs, it won't handle the operational pressure." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard turned red with anger. "How dare you question my work? I graduated from the best university in the country. I have 15 years of experience, and you're just a janitor." "I know who I am, sir. But I also know that this calculation here," she pointed to a specific line on the blueprint, "is using the strength of regular steel when it should be the special steel specified down here." Richard looked where she pointed, and his face paled slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. "You can't even read these numbers properly. Get out of here before I call security." "Sir Richard," Sarah insisted, her voice trembling with nerves but firm in conviction, "if you recalculate using the correct strength, you'll see the equipment needs at least 40% more thickness in the main wall." This time, the engineer couldn't completely hide his unease. He looked at the blueprints, then at Sarah, then back at the papers. "Enough!" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I won't be humiliated by someone who barely finished high school." Frank, one of the factory's most senior workers, stepped forward. "Sir Richard, let her explain properly. We've known Sarah for years. She doesn't talk nonsense." "Frank, are you really going to defend this nonsense too?" Richard shot back. "If she knows so much, then let her prove it. Let her show the entire board that she understands more than a trained engineer." Sarah swallowed hard. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, but she couldn't let a mistake that could put people at risk slide. "I accept, Sir Richard." The words left her mouth before she could think better of it. The room fell completely silent. Richard smirked maliciously. "Perfect. Tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon in the boardroom, you'll explain to Director Robert Wilson where my so-called mistake is. And when you embarrass yourself, I want a public apology and for you to never meddle in matters that aren't your concern again." Sarah nodded, trying to steady the trembling in her hands. "And if I'm right?" "If you're right," Richard said with a mocking grin, "I'll work a full week as a janitor, but that won't happen because you don't know the first thing about this." After the meeting, Sarah went home with a heavy heart. She lived alone in a small apartment in the South Bronx, and all night she mentally reviewed the calculations she'd seen. She didn't have access to technical books, no computer for simulations, just her memory and a few notebooks where she jotted down observations from work. The next day, she arrived at the factory earlier than usual. She spent the whole morning cleaning, but her mind was fixed on the afternoon meeting. Some co-workers came by to wish her luck, while others shook their heads in pity, thinking she'd gotten herself into an impossible situation. At exactly 2 o'clock, Sarah knocked on the boardroom door. Richard was already there, with a stack of books and a scientific calculator on the table. He had come prepared for war. Robert Wilson, the company director, was a man in his 60s, with graying hair and a gaze that exuded seriousness and experience. He'd worked at the company for over 30 years and knew every detail of the factory's operations. "Sarah, have a seat," Robert said kindly. "Richard told me about your concerns with the project. I'd like to hear your explanation." Sarah took a deep breath and began to speak. Her voice was shaky at first, but as she explained, she grew more confident. She pointed out exactly where the mistake was, explained why the calculations were wrong, and what the consequences would be if the equipment was built that way. Richard interrupted her several times, trying to trip her up with complex technical terms, but Sarah answered every challenge with a simplicity that showed deep understanding. "How do you know all this?" Robert asked, clearly impressed. That's when Sarah shared her story. Her son Michael had worked at the same factory 5 years earlier as an engineering intern. He was a brilliant young man, full of dreams and with a promising future ahead. During the months he worked there, he'd come home every night and teach his mother everything he'd learned that day. "He used to say I was smarter than most engineers he knew," Sarah said, her eyes glistening. Michael would spend hours explaining how the machines worked, how to calculate material resistance, how to read technical drawings. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story. Richard rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed. "Touching story, but second-hand knowledge is useless," he sneered. "Theory isn't practice." "You're right," Sarah agreed, "but I learned more than just theory. During these 3 years working here, I've listened to every technical conversation, seen every problem you've faced, and learned by observing and studying during my breaks." Robert leaned forward, intrigued. "And your son? Where is he working now?" Sarah's face twisted in pain. She lowered her eyes and took a few seconds to respond. "Michael isn't working in the field anymore, Sir Robert. He was fired from here after being accused of a mistake he didn't make. After that, he never recovered." The room grew tense. Robert looked at Richard, who had visibly become uneasy. "What kind of mistake?" asked the director. "A welding issue that caused the loss of an important part. Michael was blamed, but he was sure he'd done everything right. He tried to prove his innocence, but no one believed him." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Let's not dwell on past stories," he said, trying to change the subject. "What matters now is solving the current issue." But Robert wasn't willing to let it go. "Sarah, could you describe exactly what happened with your son?" "It was 5 years ago, Sir Robert. Michael was supervising a critical weld on equipment for export. The next day, they found the weld had failed and the entire part was lost. The damage was nearly $500,000. "I remember that case," Robert said thoughtfully. "It was a serious problem indeed. Michael swore he'd done everything right, that he'd followed all procedures, but the engineer in charge said he hadn't properly prepared the surface before welding." Sarah looked directly at Richard. The engineer in charge was Sir Richard. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Richard turned pale and began to stammer. I just followed the company's standard procedures. The young man made a technical error and—" "My son was so shaken," Sarah continued, her voice heavy with emotion, "that he developed anxiety issues. He couldn't sleep properly, couldn't focus. He lost confidence in himself and never worked in the field again." Robert shook his head, clearly moved by the story. "It's a very sad situation, Sarah, but let's return to the current matter. Do you stand by your position about the error in the calculations?" "I do, yes, sir. And if you'd like, I can prove it in a very simple way." Richard straightened in his chair, curious despite himself. "How?" Sarah stood up and walked to the table where the blueprints were. "Sir Robert, do you have a calculator here?" Robert handed his calculator to Sarah, who began redoing the calculations in front of the two men. Her fingers moved quickly over the numbers as she explained each step. "Look here," she said, pointing to the result on the screen. "With the material resistance specified, the minimum wall thickness should be 18 millimeters, not 12, as in the design." Richard grabbed his scientific calculator and started redoing the calculations. As the numbers appeared on the screen, his face grew paler. This can't be right," he muttered. "It is right," Sarah said firmly. "And if you manufacture this equipment with 12 millimeters of thickness, it will fail within the first week of operation." Robert took the papers and carefully examined the calculations. His decades of experience allowed him to quickly grasp the problem. "Sarah is correct," he said finally. "There's indeed a serious error in the calculations." Richard turned red with anger and humiliation. It must have been a typo, a simple oversight. These things happen. "Sir Richard," Sarah interrupted, "it wasn't a typo. You deliberately used the strength of regular steel instead of the special steel. Look here at your own notes." She pointed to some annotations in the margin of the project, handwritten by Richard. "Here you noted the correct strength value of the material, but when performing the calculations you used the wrong value. It was a deliberate choice." "That's a very serious accusation," said Robert, looking sternly at Richard. "I can explain," Richard said, breaking into a cold sweat. "I was under pressure to cut costs. The board wanted to save on materials, so I tried to find a way to reduce the thickness." "Putting the safety of the people operating this equipment at risk?" Robert asked indignantly. "No, of course not. I was going to review everything before manufacturing." "Were you going to review it, or were you just going to deliver it and hope for the best?" Sarah asked, with a sharpness that surprised everyone. Richard couldn't respond. He was cornered, and he knew it. Robert stood from his chair and walked to the window, gazing at the factory yard where hundreds of employees worked. "Richard, this is unacceptable. You've endangered not just our clients, but the company's reputation." "Sir Robert, it was just an error in judgment. I can correct the project right away." "This isn't just about this project," Robert said, turning to face him. "If you were capable of doing this now, how many other times has it happened?" The question hung in the air like a threat. Richard seemed to shrink in his seat. Sarah, who had remained silent during the argument, stepped forward. "Sir Robert, may I make a suggestion?" "Of course, Sarah. After what you've shown today, your opinion is very welcome." "I don't think Sir Richard is a bad person. I believe he's under pressure and may have lost his way. But instead of just punishing him, perhaps it would be better to create a system where such mistakes can't go unnoticed." Robert looked intrigued. "What kind of system?" "A technical review board that includes not just engineers but also experienced workers, even janitors like me who know the machines up close. Often we see problems that go unnoticed by those who only look at numbers on paper." The suggestion was revolutionary. Richard looked at Sarah with a mix of surprise and involuntary respect. "You're suggesting janitors take part in technical decisions?" he asked. "I'm suggesting that everyone who works with these machines should have a voice in evaluating projects," Sarah replied. "How many times have you faced problems that could have been avoided if you'd listened to the people who actually work with the equipment?" Robert was clearly impressed by the maturity of the proposal. "It's an interesting idea, Sarah, but how would it work in practice?" "Simple. Before any project is approved, it would go through a review by a mixed group. Engineers would analyze the calculations, workers would check practical feasibility, maintenance staff would assess ease of repair, and people like me would identify potential issues that only those who work with the machines daily can spot." Richard listened with growing attention. Despite the humiliation he was facing, he was beginning to see the wisdom in Sarah's proposal. "And what about what happened to your son?" Robert asked. Sarah's face darkened. "My son Michael now works as a delivery driver, Sir Robert. He never regained the confidence to work in engineering." "Could that be reversed?" the director asked. "I don't know, sir. He was deeply shaken. But I think if the company acknowledged that maybe an injustice was done." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was becoming increasingly clear that he had treated the young Michael unfairly. "Sarah," said Robert, "I'd like to make you an offer. How about accepting a technical inspector position here at the company, with a competitive salary and the responsibility of implementing this review system you suggested? Sarah was surprised. She hadn't expected an offer like this. I don't know, Sir Robert. I never thought about stopping being a janitor. Why not? You clearly have the knowledge and experience needed. Sarah looked at Richard, who was hanging his head, then turned back to Robert. Can I think about it? It's a very big decision. Of course, but in the meantime, I want you to oversee the corrections for this project. Richard will redo all the calculations, and you'll review everything to make sure there are no more mistakes. Richard lifted his head, surprised. I'll be working under her supervision. Yes, you will, said Robert firmly. And you'll thank her for preventing a disaster that could have cost lives and the company's reputation. In the days that followed, a strange dynamic developed between Sarah and Richard. He had been forced to accept her supervision, but at first he did so with resistance and reluctance. Here, the calculations are correct, said Richard, showing the corrections he'd made to the project. Sarah carefully examined every line, every number, every specification. Sir Richard, I think it would be better to increase the safety margin here at this joint, she said, pointing to a detail in the design. That's unnecessary. The calculations already have enough margin. Maybe, but this type of joint always causes problems when the machine gets older. I see it happen all the time on the production line. Richard sighed, annoyed, but checked the calculations again. To his surprise, Sarah was right. Her practical experience revealed issues that pure theory couldn't predict. As the days passed, Richard began to realize that Sarah's knowledge wasn't just theoretical. She had an intuitive understanding of machine behavior, born from years of observing, listening, and learning. How do you know this part will cause trouble? He asked one day, genuinely curious. Because I've cleaned these machines every day for 3 years, Sir Richard. I know when they vibrate more than usual, which noises are normal and which mean trouble, where dust builds up and why. And you learned all this on your own? By watching and asking. When I didn't understand something, I'd ask the workers. When they couldn't explain, I'd study during breaks using books borrowed from the library. Richard fell silent for a moment, processing this. And why did you never think of studying engineering formally? Sarah smiled sadly. Sir Richard, I'm a 42-year-old single mother working to support my family. When would I have had the time or money for college? The question hit Richard hard. He'd never considered the practical struggles people like Sarah faced just to improve their lives. But you clearly have the knowledge. Having knowledge and having a degree are two different things, sir. In your world, what matters is the paper on the wall, not what a person actually knows. Richard grew thoughtful. He was starting to question many of his beliefs about competence and merit. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A week later, Robert called Sarah and Richard to a new meeting. How's your work going? Well, Sir Robert, Sarah replied. Sir Richard corrected all the mistakes, and the project is safe now. And what about you, Richard? How has it been working with Sarah? Richard hesitated for a moment before answering. It's been educational, Sir Robert. Sarah has shown me problems I never even considered. Great. And what about your proposal, Sarah? Have you decided to accept the technical inspector position? Sarah took a deep breath before responding. Sir Robert, I'm very grateful for the opportunity, but I'd like to suggest something different. Go ahead. I'd like to keep working as a janitor, but with an additional role as a technical consultant. That way, I can continue observing the machines in daily operation and spot problems before they become serious. Robert was surprised. But why don't you want to leave the cleaning job? Because it's while cleaning that I see things you all miss. If I become an executive and sit in an office all day, I'll lose that direct contact with the machines. Richard looked at Sarah with growing admiration. She was turning down a promotion to do the work that truly mattered and do it better. What about the review system you proposed? Asked Robert. I'd like to implement it, but not as a boss, as a facilitator. Someone who bridges the engineer's theoretical knowledge with the worker's hands-on experience. That's a very interesting proposal, Sarah. What do you think, Richard? Richard surprised everyone with his answer. I think it's an excellent idea, Sir Robert. Working with Sarah this week, I've learned more about how our machines actually function than in the past 5 years. Robert smiled, pleased with how things were progressing. Then it's settled. Sarah, you'll continue as a janitor, but with the additional title of technical consultant, and the two of you will work together to implement the new review system. Sarah and Richard exchanged glances. An unlikely partnership was forming. In the following months, the factory underwent a remarkable transformation. The technical review system Sarah had proposed was gradually implemented, and the results were impressive. Problems that used to be discovered only after parts were manufactured were now caught during the design phase. Frank, the experienced worker who had defended Sarah in the first meeting, became one of the most active members of the review board. Sarah was right, he told Richard one day. We know a lot that could help you engineers. I realize that now, Frank, Richard replied. It took someone like Sarah to open my eyes. Mrs. Jenkins, a 68-year-old woman who had worked in maintenance for over 20 years, was also invited to join the reviews. Sweetheart, she said to Sarah, when I first started here, women weren't even allowed in the production area. Seeing you teach engineers fills my heart with joy. Sarah smiled, touched. Mrs. Jenkins had become a motherly figure to her at the factory. Mrs. Jenkins, you taught me that age doesn't stop anyone from learning new things. If I've come this far, it's because people like you showed me it was possible. But not everything was perfect. Some younger engineers resisted the new system, feeling humiliated that their designs were being reviewed by people without college degrees. This is ridiculous, complained Brian, a newly graduated engineer. I studied for 5 years to earn my degree, and now I have to take suggestions from a janitor. Richard, who was present at the meeting, stood up to defend Sarah. Brian, that janitor saved the company from a $2 million loss. Maybe you should listen instead of complaining. Sir Richard, with all due respect, but didn't you feel the same way a few months ago? The question silenced Richard. Brian was right, and he knew it. You're not wrong, Brian. I used to think exactly like you, but I learned that knowledge doesn't just come from books. Sarah taught me more about practical engineering than any college professor ever did. But she doesn't even have a degree. So what? Sarah interjected, having just arrived for the meeting. Brian, how long have you known me? Since I started working here, about 2 years. And in all that time, have you ever heard me say anything foolish about the machines? Brian fell silent. He had to admit he'd never heard Sarah say anything technically incorrect. The problem isn't that you don't have a degree, Sarah, he finally said. The problem is that this breaks all the company's hierarchy rules. Brian, Richard said, hierarchy rules exist to organize work, not to prevent problems from being solved. If Sarah has knowledge to contribute, why shouldn't we use it? Because it sets a dangerous precedent. If any employee can question engineering projects, where does it stop? Sarah took a deep breath before responding. Brian, no one's saying any employee can question anything. I'm talking about an organized system where people with proven knowledge participate in specific reviews. Do you think I'd go around questioning projects in areas I don't understand? No, but... Then what's the real problem? Are you afraid a janitor might know more than you about something? The question left Brian speechless. He was being forced to confront his own prejudices. Richard seized the moment to make a proposal. Brian, how about you work with Sarah on a project for a week? That way you can see firsthand how her knowledge complements yours. Brian hesitated, but eventually agreed. He didn't have much choice. Richard was his superior. The week of collaboration between Brian and Sarah proved eye-opening for both. Brian discovered Sarah wasn't trying to undermine or replace him, but to help him do better work. And Sarah realized not all engineers were as arrogant as she'd assumed. Some were just insecure and poorly guided. Sarah, Brian said at the week's end, I owe you an apology. I was prejudiced. No need to apologize, Brian. I understand your reaction. For years, you've been taught knowledge only comes from books and degrees. But that doesn't excuse my arrogance. It doesn't excuse it, but it explains it. What matters is that you're open to learning now. Brian smiled, genuinely moved by Sarah's generosity. You could be humiliating me right now after how I treated you. Why would I? That wouldn't help anyone. I'd rather we be partners from now on. This conversation marked a turning point in the acceptance of the new system. Brian became one of its strongest advocates, supporting participation from employees at all levels in technical reviews. 3 months after full implementation, the factory received auditors from an international company, considering a business partnership. "We've never seen anything like this," said Margaret Thompson, the lead auditor. "A system where janitors and workers participate in technical decisions is completely innovative." Robert was present for the audit, along with Richard and Sarah. "How did this idea come about?" Margaret asked. "It was Sarah's idea," Robert replied, gesturing to her. "She identified a critical error in one of our projects and proposed this solution to prevent similar issues in the future." Margaret studied Sarah with interest. "And you're an engineer?" "No, Mum. I'm a janitor and a technical consultant." "A janitor?" Margaret looked surprised. "How does a janitor understand engineering projects?" Sarah smiled. She was used to this question by now. "I learned by observing, studying, and asking questions, Mrs. Jenkins. When you work with machines every day, you learn a lot about how they function." "And the engineers agreed to work with you?" "At first, there was resistance," admitted Richard. "I was even very prejudiced myself. But I quickly realized Sarah had knowledge I didn't possess." "What kind of knowledge?" "Practical knowledge about how the machines actually behave," explained Sarah. "Engineers know how machines should work in theory. I know how they really work day to day." Mrs. Jenkins took several notes in her report. "Did you measure the results of this system?" "Yes," replied Robert. "Over the last 3 months, the post-production issue rate dropped by 70%. Plus, maintenance costs decreased significantly because the equipment is now designed with ease of repair in mind." "Impressive," said Mrs. Jenkins. "And what was the implementation cost?" Robert smiled. "Practically nothing. We just had to reorganize our processes to include more people in reviews." At the end of the audit, Mrs. Jenkins spoke directly to Sarah. "Sarah, your story is inspiring. Have you ever thought about writing a book about your experience?" "A book?" Sarah was surprised. "No, I've never considered that." "You should. Your story could inspire many others to value practical knowledge and break social barriers." The suggestion stayed in Sarah's mind. She had never seen herself as someone inspiring, just a person doing her job the best she could. That night at home, Sarah called Michael, her son. She had been trying for months to convince him to consider returning to engineering. "Hi, Mom. How was work today?" "Michael, something interesting happened. Some outside auditors came and were impressed with the work I'm doing here." "That's great, Mom. You deserve the recognition." "Son, I wanted to talk to you about something. The company is looking to hire new engineers, and Sir Robert said you'd be welcome." There was a long silence on the other end. "Mom, we've talked about this. I don't want to work in engineering anymore." "But Michael, you were so good at it. You had so much potential." "I did, Mum, but after what happened, I lost confidence. I'd rather stay in the job I have now." Sarah's heart ached. She knew Michael was still traumatized by what happened 5 years ago. "Son, what if I told you I found out the truth about what happened to you at the company?" "What truth?" "Michael, you didn't make any mistake. The problem was caused by someone else's negligence, and you were used as a scapegoat." Another long silence. "How do you know that?" "Because I worked directly with the person responsible, and because now I understand much more about the company's technical processes." "Mom, even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I don't have the desire to work in that field anymore." "But Michael, you loved engineering. Remember how your eyes lit up when you explained projects to me?" "I did, Mom. But people broke that in me." Sarah understood she couldn't force her son to return, but she didn't give up on the idea entirely. "All right, son, but if you ever change your mind, know the doors are open." "Thanks, Mom, and congratulations on your success. You're doing what I never could. Proving knowledge isn't about a degree." After hanging up, Sarah kept thinking about the conversation. Michael was proud of her, but he still carried the scars of the past. The next day, she decided to talk to Richard about her son's situation. "Sir Richard, may I speak with you about something personal?" "Of course, Sarah, go ahead." It's about my son Michael. I'd like to understand better what really happened when he was fired. Richard Thompson visibly tensed. Sarah, that was a long time ago. Sir Richard, I'm not trying to accuse anyone. I just want to know the truth so I can help my son recover. Richard let out a deep sigh. Sarah, what I'm about to tell you doesn't make me proud at all. I'm ready to hear it. Michael was an exceptional intern, maybe the best we've ever had here. He was smart, dedicated, and had an incredible technical intuition. Then why was he fired? Because I felt threatened by him. The confession hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Threatened? Michael questioned some of my methods, not disrespectfully but with solid technical arguments. He was right most of the time, and that bothered me. And the welding mistake? Richard lowered his head, clearly ashamed. It wasn't Michael's fault. I changed the welding procedure without telling him, trying to save time. When the part failed, I blamed Michael to avoid taking responsibility. Sarah felt a mix of anger and sadness. Do you realize you destroyed my son's life? I do, Sarah, and it haunts me every day. When I started working with you and saw your competence, I realized I'd treated Michael as unfairly as I treated you at first. Why didn't you tell the truth back then? Cowardice, Sarah. Pure cowardice. I was more worried about protecting my position than doing what was right. Sarah stayed silent for several minutes, processing the information. Sir Richard, would you be willing to talk to Michael? To tell him the truth? If it could help him in any way, yes, I'm willing. I don't know if it'll help, but he deserves to know the truth. Richard nodded, knowing it was the right thing to do, no matter how hard. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. A week later, Sarah managed to convince Michael to meet with Richard. They arranged to meet at a cafe near the factory, neutral ground where Michael would feel more comfortable. Michael, Richard said when the young man arrived, thank you for agreeing to talk to me. Michael was visibly tense. My mum said you had something important to tell me. I do, and it won't be easy for either of us. Richard began to tell the whole truth. He explained how he'd felt threatened by Michael's talent, how he'd changed the procedure without warning, and how he'd blamed the young man to protect his own position. Michael listened silently, his face shifting through a range of emotions: surprise, anger, sadness, and finally something like relief. I knew, he said at last. I knew I'd done that weld correctly, but no one believed me. I know, Michael, and I can't put into words how much I regret what I did. Do you have any idea how much that destroyed my confidence? That I never worked in the field again because I kept thinking I was incompetent? I do, and I take full responsibility for it. Michael stayed quiet for several minutes. What do you expect me to do with this information now? Nothing, Michael. I just wanted you to know the truth. And if you ever want to return to engineering, I'll do everything in my power to support you. Why should I trust you now? You shouldn't, Richard admitted. I broke your trust once, but your mother has taught me a lot about honesty and courage. Maybe I can learn to be a better person. Michael looked at Richard with an unreadable expression. My mother told me about the changes you implemented at the company. Yes, and they were all her ideas. Sarah revolutionized the way we work. She's always been smart. I tried teaching her engineering, but often she was the one teaching me things I didn't know. Michael, would you like to see the new system we put in place? I'm not offering you a job, just showing how things have changed. Michael hesitated. I don't know if I'm ready for that. You don't have to decide now. The offer stands. The meeting ended without any definite conclusions, but with the truth finally out in the open. Michael left carrying a mix of conflicting emotions. That night he called Sarah. Mom, I talked to Sir Richard. And how did it go? Hard, but enlightening. Did you know everything he told me? I suspected some of it, but I only knew for sure recently. Mom, how can you work with someone who did that to me? Sarah thought carefully before answering. Michael, I've learned that people can change. The Sister Richard I work with today is different from the one who hurt you 5 years ago. But how can you be sure? Because I see how he treats people now, how he admits when he's wrong, how he values knowledge he once dismissed. Did you forgive him? I forgave him because holding on to resentment wouldn't change the past or help the future. But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or not holding someone accountable. Michael stayed silent, processing his mother's words. Mom, do you think I should consider going back to engineering? Son, that decision has to be yours alone. But I can tell you one thing, you had a special talent for it. And talent like that shouldn't go to waste. But what if I can't do it anymore? What if I've lost the ability? Michael, knowledge is like riding a bike. Once you learn, you never completely forget. You might need time to regain confidence, but the foundation is still there. You really believe that? I'm sure of it. And you know why? Because you're the one who taught me everything I know about engineering. If I could use that knowledge to make a difference, imagine what you could do with your full training. The conversation planted a seed in Michael's mind. For the first time in 5 years, he seriously considered returning to the field. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the factory to Sarah's surprise. Michael, what are you doing here? I came to see these changes you implemented. Sarah was moved. She knew this was a big step for her son. Want me to show you how it works? I do. Sarah took Michael to see the new technical review system. She introduced him to Frank, Mrs. Jenkins, Brian, and other team members. Everyone, she said, this is my son Michael. He's an engineer. The Michael you always talk about? Asked Frank. The one who taught you everything about machines. That's him. Michael was surprised to realize his mother spoke of him with pride to her colleagues. Michael, said Mrs. Jenkins, your mother is an inspiration to all of us. She showed that anyone can learn and teach no matter their position. She's always been like that, Michael replied, looking at his mother with admiration. She always believed knowledge has no boundaries. During the visit, Michael observed how the system worked. He saw engineers and workers collaborating, how different perspectives combined to create better solutions. This is amazing, Mom, he said. It's exactly the kind of environment I dreamed of when I started studying engineering. And you could be part of it if you wanted. Michael looked around, seeing the harmony and mutual respect among all the employees. Maybe it's time to try again. Sarah felt her eyes welling up. I had waited years to hear those words from my son. Are you sure, Michael? No, I'm scared, but I think I need to try. Robert, who had witnessed part of the visit, approached them. Michael, your mother has told me so much about you. If you're interested, we have some openings for junior engineers. Sir Robert, I'd be honored to work for a company that values my mother's knowledge. Then consider yourself hired. When can you start? Michael looked at Sarah, who was beaming with happiness. I can start on Monday. That night, mother and son went out to dinner to celebrate. It was the first time in years that Michael seemed genuinely excited about the future. Mom, thank you for never giving up on me. Michael, you're my son. I'd never give up on you. I know it wasn't easy seeing me waste everything I'd learned. You didn't waste anything, son. You just needed time to recover. And now that you're ready, you're going to make a difference. Do you think I'll work well with Sir Richard? I do. He's changed a lot, Michael. And you both have a unique opportunity to build a new relationship based on mutual respect. I hope you're right. I am. And you know why? Because you've both learned the value of humility. That'll help you work better together. Michael's first week at the company was intense. Richard made sure to treat him with the utmost respect and included him in all the important projects. Michael, he said on the first day, I want you to know I'm truly happy you're here. Thank you, Sir Richard. I'm excited to work. If you have any problems or concerns, you can talk to me directly. I want you to feel comfortable here. Michael nodded, still a bit cautious but determined to give it a chance. During the first project meetings, Michael proved he hadn't lost his technical skills. His suggestions were precise and innovative, impressing the whole team. Michael, said Brian after a meeting, your ideas are brilliant. How did you keep your knowledge up to date all these years? I never stopped studying, Michael replied. Even when I wasn't working in the field, I kept reading about new technological developments. Why? Because deep down, I always hoped I could come back someday. Sarah, who was present at the meeting as a technical consultant, smiled proudly at her son. Michael has always been persistent, she said. Even when things got tough, he never lost his curiosity. As the days passed, the relationship between Michael and Richard began to normalize. They worked well together, and Richard made sure to publicly acknowledge the young engineer's contributions. "Michael saved our project once again," he said in a meeting with the board. "His expertise has been crucial to the team's success." Robert was pleased with how things were progressing. "Sarah, it seems your family is making a difference in our company." "Sir Robert, the difference is being made by everyone who embraced change. Michael and I are just part of a bigger team. You've always been modest, Sarah, but there's no denying you've transformed this company. I didn't do it alone. We transformed it together." 3 months after Michael's return, the company received an Innovation Award in Human Resources Management. The technical review system Sarah had implemented had caught the attention of experts nationwide. "This award isn't mine," Sarah said during the ceremony. "It belongs to every employee who believed we could do things differently." In the audience, Michael clapped with emotion, watching his mother being publicly recognized for her contributions. After the ceremony, a journalist approached Sarah for an interview. "Sarah, your story is inspiring. A janitor who revolutionized an engineering company. How do you feel?" "I feel grateful for having had the opportunity to contribute, but I want to make it clear that I'm not just a janitor. I'm a person who happens to work in cleaning, but also has knowledge in other areas. And what message would you like to leave for others in similar situations? That knowledge has no social class. That curiosity and the desire to learn can take anyone to unimaginable places, and that mutual respect is the foundation of any real transformation." "What about your son? How do you feel seeing him back in the field he loves?" "I feel complete. Michael always had a special talent, and now he can use that gift in an environment that values him. It's all a mother could wish for." The interview was published in a national magazine and sparked hundreds of comments from people who identified with Sarah Johnson's story. Many shared their own experiences of overcoming adversity and prejudice. One letter that touched Sarah deeply was from a 72-year-old woman named Beatrice from New Orleans. "Dear Sarah, your story reminded me of my own struggle. I worked 40 years as a maid, but I always loved math. In my free time, I helped my employers' children with their homework. They were always surprised at how I could solve problems they didn't understand. Now at 72, I'm studying to get my GED. Your story gave me the courage to never stop learning." Sarah personally replied to Beatrice and many others who wrote to her. She felt responsible for encouraging others to pursue their dreams, no matter the circumstances. A year after fully implementing the new system, the company had become a national benchmark for participatory management. Business owners and researchers from across the United States visited to understand how the model worked. During one such visit, an entrepreneur from Minneapolis asked Sarah a question that stayed with her. "Sarah, if you could go back in time, would you change anything about your journey?" She thought for a few seconds before answering. "Oh, I'd change just one thing. I'd have had the courage to speak up sooner. I stayed silent for 3 years, watching problems I could have helped solve earlier." "And why did you stay silent?" "Out of fear. Fear of being ridiculed, of losing my job, of being seen as someone who didn't know their place." "What gave you the courage to finally speak up?" "Seeing that lives could be at risk. There are moments when you have to choose between your own safety and doing what's right. And you don't regret it. Never. It was the best decision I ever made." Michael, who was present at the meeting, was moved hearing his mother speak. He knew how much courage it had taken for her to take that first step. After the visit, mother and son talked in the factory courtyard. "Mom, do you realize how many people you've inspired?" "Michael, I didn't do anything extraordinary. I just used the knowledge I had to help where it was needed." "But that's exactly what makes it extraordinary. How many people have knowledge but lack the courage to share it? Too many, unfortunately, and that's a loss for everyone." "Mom, I have an idea." "What?" "What if we wrote a book together, telling our story, but also giving practical guidance for others who want to break similar barriers. Sarah was surprised by the suggestion. A book? But I'm not a writer, Michael. You don't have to be. You have a story to tell and experiences to share. I can help with the technical side of writing. Do you think anyone would be interested in reading it? Mum, based on the response to your interview, I'm sure they would. Plus, it'd be a way to help others find the courage to pursue their dreams. The idea for the book began to take shape. Sarah and Michael spent their nights writing, recalling details of their journey, organizing thoughts and experiences. Richard, when he learned about the project, offered his help. I can contribute the perspective of someone who needed to change his prejudices, he said. Maybe this will help other managers rethink their attitudes. That would be very valuable, Sir Richard, Sarah replied. Your transformation is an important part of the story. Robert also volunteered to write the book's foreword. Your story deserves to be told, he said. It could inspire changes in companies across the country. 2 years later, the book, Knowledge Without Boundaries, the story of a janitor who changed a company, was published and became a bestseller. On the night of the launch, Sarah was nervous to speak to the packed bookstore audience. When I started working as a janitor, she said, I never imagined that one day I'd be here talking about a book I wrote. But I've learned that life has these surprises when you have the courage to be who you really are. In the audience, Michael clapped proudly, alongside Richard, Robert, Frank, Mrs. Jenkins, Brian, and dozens of other colleagues from the factory who had come to support her. This book isn't just about me, Sarah continued. It's about all the people who have valuable knowledge, but are ignored because of prejudice. It's an invitation for all of us to recognize each other's worth, regardless of titles or social positions. The presentation was moving, and many in the audience connected with the story. A young engineer approached Sarah afterward. Sarah, I've been an engineer for 5 years, but I always ignore the suggestions from the workers at my company. Your book made me realize I'm missing valuable opportunities. It's never too late to change, Sarah replied, and you'll be surprised by how much you can learn by listening to those who work directly with the machines. A businessman from Pittsburgh also came up to her. Sarah, I want to implement a similar system in my company. Could you give us some guidance? Of course. But remember, the most important thing isn't copying exactly what we did, but creating an environment where everyone feels valued and heard. The book's success led to Sarah being invited to speak at universities and companies across the United States. She always accepted, seeing each opportunity as a chance to inspire positive change. During one of these talks at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an engineering student asked a question that stayed with her. Sarah, do you think universities should include courses on how to value practical knowledge in their curriculums? I think it's essential, she replied. Future engineers need to learn that theory and practice complement each other. That respecting those who work directly with the machines isn't optional. It's crucial for doing good work. But how could that be implemented? Mandatory internships where students work side by side with experienced workers. Courses that teach the importance of active listening. Practical projects that involve different hierarchical levels. The talk had such an impact that some universities began revising their curriculums, incorporating elements of participatory management and valuing practical knowledge. 5 years after the story began, the factory had become an international case study. Delegations from countries like Germany, Japan, and the United States came to learn about the American model of participatory management. During one of these visits, a Japanese executive made an observation that filled everyone with pride. In Japan, we talk a lot about Kaizen, continuous improvement, but you've taken it to a new level, creating a system where improvement comes from everyone, not just the managers. Sarah, now internationally recognized as an expert in participatory management, responded humbly. Sir Takahashi, we didn't invent anything new. We simply created an environment where knowledge can flow freely, regardless of its origin. And what's the secret to making it work? Mutual respect and a genuine willingness to learn from one another. Michael, who now held the position of project manager, added, and leadership that has the courage to admit it, doesn't know everything and is willing to change. Richard, present at the meeting, smiled. He had become a fervent advocate of the participatory model and often spoke about his own transformation. "Sir Takahashi," he said, "I can assure you this system not only improves the technical quality of projects, but also makes the work environment more humane and rewarding for everyone." That evening, during the celebration dinner, Sarah found herself alone for a few minutes in the company garden. Michael approached her. "Mom, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how life can surprise us, son. 6 years ago, I was just an invisible janitor. Today, people from all over the world come here to learn from us. You were never just a janitor, Mom. You've always been an extraordinary person who happened to work in cleaning." "And what about you, Michael? Are you happy with the direction your life has taken?" "Mom, I'm more than happy. I'm fulfilled. I work in a field I love, in an environment that values me, alongside people I respect. And even better, I get to work with my mom, who's my greatest inspiration. Michael, you know none of this would have been possible if you hadn't taught me everything about engineering, and nothing would have happened if you hadn't had the courage to speak up when it was needed." Mother and son embraced, moved by the journey they had traveled together. The end of the story. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of this story of overcoming and transformation? Sarah proved that knowledge and competence don't depend on diplomas or social positions, but rather on dedication, courage, and the will to make a difference. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced or witnessed a similar situation? Do you believe mutual respect can truly transform workplaces? Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to leave a like if this story inspired you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other moving stories that show the power of human determination. Thank you for your company.